Tom right here. Tom will look all the way back.
Big online news. Spider-Man star Tom Holland says he's taking a break from social media for his mental health.
I find Instagram and Twitter to be overstimulating, to be overwhelming. I get caught up and I spiral when I read things about me online.
If a big star like Tom Holland is struggling to preserve his mental health because of social media, how can any young person be expected to navigate it?
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Do you ever feel caught up in the web, or more precisely, is social media doing us more harm than good? The actor who plays Spider-Man, Tom Holland, certainly appears to think so, and he announced last week he was deleting Instagram and Twitter to save his mental health. Like so many of us, he said he found it overstimulating and overwhelming and felt very low after reading negative things about himself online. So in this program, we're going to be looking at whether or not social media is doing us more harm than good, and examining allegations that big tech is the new big tobacco. In other words, it knows it's doing us harm, but is covering it up. Let's start with a quick look at the Tom Holland story.
Peter, you're struggling.
This is all my fault. I can't save everyone.
When Spider-Man's senses start tingling, you know it's time to pay attention. Something is seriously wrong. And so, Tom Holland, the man behind the mask, no doubt did the right thing when he decided to take a break from social media. Finding himself caught in the web, he announced his momentous decision on Instagram, where he has 67 million followers.
I have taken a break from social media for my mental health, because I find Instagram and Twitter to be overstimulating, to be overwhelming. I get caught up and I spiral when I read things about me online, and ultimately it's very detrimental to my mental state. So I decided to take a step back and delete the app.
Now, Tom Holland didn't specify what had upset him, but a quick trawl through his Twitter feed does reveal some rather spiteful comments. "I am sorry, but this movie was trash," said one. "I can't understand why people go to watch Tom Holland movies. Such a bad actor." "The Tom Holland Spider-Man films all suck," says another. Finally, "Tom Holland's acting is like watching a plank of wood, emotionless. Him and Zendaya are easily the worst actors in any Spider-Man. Hell, even the Japanese Spider-Man had better acting, lol." Now, when you think about it, Tom Holland is, at least on the face of it, in a far stronger position to handle nasty things being said about him than your average person. After all, he's a widely liked and well-known movie star worth something like $25 million, and he appears to have a very bright future in Hollywood. So his recent decision has left some people rather baffled.
If a big star like Tom Holland is struggling to preserve his mental health because of social media, how can any young person be expected to navigate it? And by the way, also, what a gift he's given to all of us being so candid about this.
Of course, not everyone thinks it's a gift. One comedian known for her spiteful and shameless comedy, Amy Schumer, appeared to make fun of him on Instagram.
I've decided, for my own mental health, to do more social media. I find that looking at my phone for 8.5 hours a day is helping me.
Schumer now says she wasn't making fun of Tom Holland, but was in fact making fun of herself. However, a lot of people aren't convinced. One person tweets, "Amy Schumer? You mocking a person raising awareness and providing tools for young people to deal with their mental health is precisely the reason why Tom Holland stays away from toxic social media. Thank you for proving his point." Another tweets, "This is why mental health isn't taken seriously, because stupid people want to butt in and crack jokes when it's not a funny situation." Both these people make quite a good point. Numerous studies show that social media does bring us down. One study from the University of Bath earlier this year revealed that taking a break from social media for just 1 week improved people's overall well-being and reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety. The participants in that study, aged 18 to 72, had previously been using social media for 8 hours a week on average. Given that kids in the UK, aged 4 to 18, spend on average over 4 hours a day on social media, the damage being done to their mental health may be incalculable.
they're watching their apps all night. They're not getting good sleep, and that really affects us, and it can be linked to increased rates of depression.
Intuitively, most of us already suspected that social media takes a toll on our mental health. But we needn't rely on our spidey senses to come to that conclusion. Some of the pioneers of big tech admitted long ago that they knew their platforms were doing harm. Here's Facebook co-founder Sean Parker.
That went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, to really understand it. That thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. Productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. Anxiety is a huge problem now.
Right after Parker came forward, another Facebook executive, Chamath Palihapitiya, admitted he felt tremendous guilt about the company he helped to build.
The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. I can control my decisions, which is I don't use it. I can control my kids' decisions, which is they're not allowed to use it.
Now, if you're still wondering what to do with your social media accounts after hearing all of that, let us conclude with this piece of advice from Jared Lanier, one of the great names of Silicon Valley and considered to be one of the fathers of virtual reality.
Even though it's hard to delete your accounts, when you do, you get happier. You get more productive, you have more time. But that might be the least of the reasons. When a lot of people do, their society becomes better, it becomes more peaceful. People believe in facts more instead of silly conspiracy theories. What's amazing is that just this one technology seems to have made every layer of life worse, but since we're all addicted to it, it's hard to see that.
Well, bearing all of that in mind, is it time we all took a break from social media? We'll hear from our experts in just a moment, but first let's get our weekly view from the man and woman on the street. And our producer Salahuddin went to the world-famous Oxford Circus and asked people how social media has affected them.
My grandchildren have been affected quite badly because they have backaches, they have headaches, and they have, squint eyes, and they're all the time doing it and not going out for fresh air, into the room, and doing all kinds of things,
I can understand, especially for Tom Holland's case, all eyes on him, how he would need to have that time off just to recuperate and not overthink all the different opinions that probably don't matter but will still impact how he feels.
I have considered a break from social media and I've taken many breaks before. I feel like everyone deserves a break from social media. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it kind of helps people see reality more if you take a break.
If I finish with Facebook, I go on my WhatsApp. If I finish WhatsApp, I go on my Instagram. There are so many things to do. So it never ends.
Well, it just shows you it affects people of all ages, doesn't it? Let's bring in our guest now. And we have Anna Lembke. She is a professor of psychiatry and social behavior at Stanford University, who featured in the 2020 Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. She's also the author of Dopamine Nation. Brian Primack is the Dean of Public Health and Human Sciences at Oregon State University, who's conducted a number of studies on the effects of social media on our mental health. He's also the author of You Are What You Click. And Nir Eyal is a behavioral design consultant who knows exactly how to make a product hook an audience and outlines this all in his book, Hooked. Well, welcome to all three of you. Anna, I'd like to start with you. You're a professor of psychiatry, but you also have a clinical practice, which means you do still see patients. Now, Tom Holland, he's made quite a sensible decision, a preemptive one, if you like, but some of your patients have much, much bigger problems. Can you tell us a bit about what you're seeing in your practice?
In my practice, I'm seeing individuals who come in who are spending enormous quantities of time consuming digital content and who know that it's adversely impacting their lives in myriad ways but cannot stop even when they want to. And this is really the hallmark of addiction, continued compulsive use despite harm to self and or others. Some of these individuals even become suicidal as a result of their compulsive overconsumption of digital content.
Some people might say this is rather weak-minded of them and that they need to have some more self-discipline. What do you advise them?
I think that we've hopefully moved past that when we think about addiction. We're now really conceptualizing addiction as a disease, a brain disease that some people are very vulnerable to and others not so much. As I always like to say, the majority of people who consume alcohol will not get addicted to alcohol, but some 10 to 15% of those individuals will. And it's not because they're weak-minded, it's because they have an innate vulnerability combined with their environmental situation, their developmental trajectory, all of which conspires to make them vulnerable to this disease, which changes their brain. And the same thing is true with consuming digital content.
And do you think that, like Tom Holland, a week away or multiple weeks away, months away, would alleviate this problem for them?
Absolutely, because this is what we do in our clinical practice. We ask patients who have become addicted to online gaming, pornography, social media, shopping, to actually abstain from that behavior for a period of time to reset reward pathways. And what we find is that not only does it decrease their compulsions to consume that content, but it also improves mood, improves sleep, improves self-care, and they come away from that experience really surprised because they have the subjective sense that they're using the content because they're depressed, but after they've stopped for a period of time, they're really able to see that it's the consuming of the digital content that's making them depressed in the first place.
Well, with some addictions, the advice is never return to that substance, if you like, because you'll just, you'll be back in trouble once more. Do you advise them to never return or can they return but with greater control?
So I think the discussion of moderating use is really important, especially when we're talking about compulsive overconsumption of digital drugs. Why? Because it's impossible to completely abstain. Our lives are so intertwined with these devices and with being on the internet that it's simply not realistic to ask people to not be on the internet and not be on their device. So then it becomes a question of, okay, how can I live in a healthy way with this technology? And that may mean maybe abstaining from particular apps or particular websites or particular ways of interacting online, but not abstaining altogether. In fact, the field of addiction medicine has moved away from complete abstinence for all individuals, as we find that some individuals who have used a substance, including drugs and alcohol, in an addictive way can ultimately return to using that substance in moderation after a period of abstinence and after a lot of recovery work and a lot of planning that goes into building barriers between themselves and their drug of choice so that they can moderate their consumption.
Brian Primack, once Tom Holland made this announcement, you were quickly brought on to a number of TV networks, I believe, and you were asked very specifically, how is it if a man like Tom Holland, who's worth a lot of money, is very famous, has a great future, he's to be envied, in fact, if anything, on social media, but how is it if he can't cope? How would anybody be able to cope? But I wonder if it's actually not as simple as that. Perhaps these famous people have very specific pressures to deal with.
It's a good point. And Mr. Holland's experience obviously is going to be very unique given what a star he is. I do think that there are lessons for ordinary people and that it's great that he was able to forge a pathway for helping some other people to make similar kinds of decisions. But I agree with what Dr. Lemke was just saying, that it really needs to be nuanced. We need to recognize that everybody has a very different experience with social media, and that it's not just a one-size-fits-all decision, because we're all such different individuals. This is why in my book, You Are What You Click, I focus on, for example, matching the kind of social media use that individual people have with their personalities. Those are the kinds of nuances that I think we're going to need to go to in the future.
Could you get into that a little bit more? Matching social media use to personalities. How do you mean?
Oh, sure. Different people have very different experiences because of their unique makeup. Some people love roller coasters because inherently it makes them excited. Other people, it just makes them sick. And so when we look at different personality characteristics, like being more introverted or extroverted, being more open or more closed, that kind of thing, what we see is that these people have very, very different experiences with different kinds of social media. And so a lot of our research in my lab has been on trying to understand how different kinds of people react differently to different types of social media.
So people need to be using social media in a very conscious way. How is this affecting me? What benefits me? And then they need to tailor-make their approach accordingly. Can I ask you about a couple of your studies? I know you've conducted many studies. One of them shows that young adults, this is sort of counterintuitive, with high social media use felt more isolated. Can you explain that outcome?
Yeah, sure. We were surprised at this because it was a linear effect. Basically, whatever increase there was in social media was matched with an increase in feeling lonely. And even though it seems at first like that is counterintuitive, when we were able to do qualitative work and actually talk to these people, we started to understand a little bit more of what it's like. One reason for this possibly is the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is just that you could be doing other things that might be more fulfilling and meaningful to you. And so people who are using a lot of social media, they might be having very superficial interactions, and so they may be missing out on those things that are more meaningful in person. Another thing that may mediate this relationship is that whole idea of social comparison. So as we know, on social media, we're bathed in these highlight reels that make us feel like we can't possibly measure up. And that's the kind of thing that can also make someone feel lonely. They can sort of say, oh, everybody else is in this party and having a great time and having successes, but you know, I'm just an ordinary person.
Nir, you're kind of a little different perhaps to the rest of the panel in that you've told our guest producer that you feel it's not really social media that is the problem per se, but it's down to the individual to have personal responsibility and to show a little bit of self-discipline. Now, that's a bit of a reductionist explanation for your opinion. You take it away. Tell us, what do you think here?
Yeah, it definitely is. So the stance that I take is that this is not your fault. You didn't invent social media. You're not Mark Zuckerberg. You didn't create this stuff. You didn't create the iPhone. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because whose responsibility is it? If we wait for these social media companies to make their products less engaging, if we wait for the geniuses in government to fix this problem for us, if we hold our breath, we will suffocate. And I think what we all agree on, Brian and Anna and I all agree on, is that there's a lot that we can do ourselves to help get the best of these technologies without letting them get the best of us, with the exception, I'm so glad that Anna mentioned it, with the exception of people who are pathologically addicted, which, as Anna said, is about 10% of the population. So there's a very high probability that for you, unless you have the pathology of addiction, you are not someone who has a ton of difficulty with this. This is not an addiction for you, but rather it is a distraction. Now, of course, we love the language of addiction. We love to think that we're all addicted, that it's hijacking our brains, because then it's not my fault. It's Mark Zuckerberg's fault. Whereas, of course, there's so much we can do.
Well, look, I mean, you're saying that there's a small percentage of people who find addiction a problem. But on the other hand, if you look at the average usage of social media amongst, say for example, take the United Kingdom, young kids, average usage of, say, 4 hours a day, they could be doing something better with their time, and that is not a specific tiny proportion of the population. That's average.
That's interesting because in the United States, we know that researchers found from Pew that the average American watches 5 hours of television per day. Why aren't we having the discussion around how people are spending their time? You know why we shouldn't have this discussion? Because it's none of our business how people spend their time. That's up for them to decide.
Well, hang on.
Now,
there's a bit of a difference. There's a bit of a difference between social media, if I may just jump in for a second and defend television, because there's a bit of a difference, isn't there? Social media, everybody in the household has their own personal screen. They disappear off to their own personal rooms, and God knows what they're doing, right? Now, with television, it used to be known as the idiot box, so it's not as good as books, say, but at least people are gathered around in the same room enjoying the same experience, and you can regulate what the children are seeing.
Well, I would argue that there's all kinds of wonderful benefits for social media as well. When you think about the fact that LGBT youth, we know that LGBT youth has suicide rates has dropped precipitously. Part of the reason is that you can connect with disparate communities online. So of course, there's a lot of benefits
but you know
here
who
and
else
a lot
can
of
connect?
nuance.
White supremacists can connect online too. So you've kind of got Anna, come in.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I want to push back a little bit on what Nir is saying. Not surprisingly, he and I have debated before on this topic. I disagree with his statement. Why do we care how people are spending their time? We have a social responsibility to care for those who are most vulnerable in our society. And that means that there are individuals for whom their interaction online and consuming this digital content, especially children, I would argue, are people that we must be caring about and that we must be responsible for, recognizing that the digital content is intrinsically reinforcing. It was made to be that way, and that essentially the companies who are profiting from this digital content have a responsibility to their consumers, just like people who make cigarettes have a responsibility to people who buy cigarettes. We don't sell cigarettes to children. We don't advertise tobacco to children. And we have to conceptualize these digital drugs very similarly.
Anna, you sort of bring us neatly to the comparison with big tobacco. And we know from the whistleblower from Facebook, Frances Haugen, that Facebook did model some of its strategies on big tobacco, and we've heard from Facebook executives pretty much exactly that. Here's Senator Ed Markey. Instagram is that first childhood cigarette meant to get teens hooked early. Facebook is just like big tobacco. And we also had former Facebook executive Tim Kendall saying, Facebook took a page from big tobacco's playbook, working to make our offering addictive from the outset. So, Nir Eyal, answer that one.
So I think the comparison should not be with cigarettes. I think the comparison should be with cities. That a much better comparison is not with cigarettes, because there's not much health benefits to cigarettes. Whereas with social media, there's a lot of benefits. We know that connecting with disparate communities can benefit certain people's psychological well-being. It's just like when you go to a city, some people go to the city from the country and they think it's terrible. They're encountering people who are rich, they're encountering people who are poor, and it makes them uncomfortable. Many people think that cities make people depressed, kind of like they think social media makes us depressed, and the facts are it's exactly the opposite. So it's just not true that it makes everyone depressed or that everyone's addicted. Some people do get addicted, just like some people get addicted, as Anna said, to alcohol. Some people get addicted to all sorts of things. It's really more nuanced than just saying all of us are somehow getting
Fair enough.
addicted
Okay, well, we're coming towards the end of the program, so I'd like to ask you all about what you think is the fair balance then between freedom to do whatever you want and regulation. Who'd like to start us off?
So this problem is really comparable to climate change. And climate change is going to require not just a bottom-up change from our individual behavior, but also top-down, where the government, corporations, everybody steps up and does their part to solve what is a growing social problem. It's clear in my mind that the way that we consume digital drugs is a growing social problem. We can't just expect individuals and parents of children to somehow fix that when this is a communal and societal problem. We need the corporations who produce and profit these drugs and the governments to step in and create guardrails, make regulations so that we can have a healthy relationship with technology. I just want to punch in there that when cigarettes were first marketed and sold, they were marketed and sold as healthy. Doctors smoked cigarettes in advertisements. So, our conception of what is healthy and what isn't evolves over time as we gain more knowledge. And what's happening now is we're gaining knowledge about the dark underbelly of the internet.
Brian, just quickly, your recommendations for regulation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would probably be somewhere in the middle. I think that what we're dealing with is a double-edged sword. Clearly that we've all experienced the positive that we're hearing Nir talk about, and social media can provide connection and warmth. But we've also seen a lot of data that strongly link a lot of social media use, I would say, even among people who are not addicted. So even among people who are not addicted, the more social media that's used in general, is linked to more depression, anxiety, and loneliness. So I do think that there is, some responsibility of, the platforms and government to help deal with this, as there is, also importance for people to think about these things in a nuanced way.
Nir, just finally then, we're talking about guardrails, we're talking about government interference. What's your answer?
Very simple. So number one, protection from foreign government interference. That's common sense. Number two, protection for children. Also common sense. Children are a protected class. They deserve special protection. A special class that we need to create is people who are pathologically addicted. So I've been writing for over 8 years now. Companies need to have a use and abuse policy that says if you spend more than X hour numbers a week on our platform, we will send you a polite message that says you may be struggling with an addiction. Can we help? And if the companies won't do that themselves, we should help them do that by legislating. And that's common sense legislation that leaves the rest of us the hell alone so we can go about our business, but helps people who are psychologically vulnerable and struggle with addiction.
Nir, Brian, and Anna, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.